We can build a more beautiful world. It is available to us. It's begging us to step into its service. And when we do, when we bow into the service of this future, all kinds of synchronicities and miracles can happen. This is a return to our interconnections that we've been craving for a long time and compensating for by consumption. With power, with all of the substitutes for the interconnections and the intimacy and the relationships that make somebody fully human.
Hello and welcome back. Thank you to our newest patrons. We are always so grateful for the support of our patrons. I apologize if I pronounce anyone's name imperfectly, as I am just seeing them written for the first time and have never heard them. And so I'd like to thank Naomi Erich, Denisel Gail Montanez Patron, Yonique Yanda, Annie Ward, and Rachel Fleming. We are always so grateful for the support. And if you would like to be part of the making of the show in this way, then you too can join as a monthly patron. We are now starting our second year of Presence Collective, which is our online community for creative, connected, and courageous living. This is a wonderful time to join on an annual membership where you get 4 months complimentary and join us for a full adventure around the spiral. You will have access to everything we've created this past year as well. The themes we explore are grief and transformation, rituals and cycles, sacred activism, yoga and meditation, energy, intuition, leadership, creativity, and regenerative futures, with time for integration along the way. As well as that, you'll receive monthly tree whispers, weekly contemplation questions, access to the Future is Beautiful live sessions, circle community calls, extra workshops, calls with special guests, meditations, mantras, yoga asana classes, a selection of recommendations such as book recommendations, talk recommendations, and poems that I love, moon cycle awareness, so information about the new and the full moon so you can live in tune with these cycles, as well as talks and workshops that I've given in the past, and special rates on private sessions. It is a beautiful and powerful accompaniment to your journey, and I hope to spend time with you there. This week is a special episode made possible by the Great Feast of London, which is a festival which took place last month. The wellness part of the festival was curated by Lauren Raby from Psyche Wellness, who invited me to share a full moon heart meditation and this conversation. It was part of a live stream that went out on July 5th. My guest today was actually our guest on episode 1 of this podcast, which was called Love as an Ecological Act. I wasn't sure about having guests come back, but the lives we did recently revealed how important it is to continue the conversations and to continue to deepen the community we have created. And so here on episode 98, we welcome back Charles Eisenstein, who is a social philosopher, public speaker, and author who examines the unspoken narratives that direct our society and our lives. His work covers a wide range of topics, including the history of human civilization, consciousness, economics, spirituality, interdependence, ecology, and how myth and story influence culture. He is the author of The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, Sacred Economics, and The Ascent of Humanity. His most recent essays, The Coronation and The Conspiracy Myth, provides us with insights into the current season of global transformation. Charles has just begun a new course with One Commune called Political Hope, which is free to take part in over this next week. In the conversation, Charles mentions our friend Manish Jain, who has also been on this podcast. Earlier this week was an Indian celebration which comes from Hindu culture. It's called Raksha Bandhan, and it's about protection and care. Traditionally, it's a ritual celebrated between brothers and sisters, where the sister ties a rakhi on her brother's wrist, offering protection, and the brother gives a gift symbolizing their care. It was beautiful to celebrate it with my brother this year. I was also with my nieces, and inspired by what Manish Jain shared, we went and tied Rakis to the tree and did a little ritual around our interbeingness. Manish shared, I believe Raksha Bandhan or Rakhi is one of the most important festivals for healing ourselves and the world today. It is a celebration of mutual care, gratitude, and interbeingness. We need to reclaim it from the narratives of the nation state and the market and reoffer it to our friends around the world with the spirit of Vasudev Kutumbakam, which means the world is one family. The sacred ritual of tying a Rakhi thread gives us a practical and simple tool to radically expand our sense of self and sense of family. We can literally add family members to our lives. People in villages tie Rakhi threads not only to their human brothers and sisters, but also on the more than human beings. When they or we tie these Rakhis on their trees, animals, gates, books, even motorcycles, we are symbolically breaking free from the modernist, schooled, anthropocentric mindset, and in the most profound sense, acknowledging, surrendering to the vast intelligence and care of many other beings who co-create life with us. On the live stream, where this episode was recorded with Charles, he had some connectivity issues, so he comes in and out a bit, but we keep the flow of the conversation just fine, and he changes mics about 5 minutes in, so don't worry, the sound improves. In this conversation called What Happens to the World Happens to Ourselves, we explore the themes of local living, sharing economies, and the pandemic as we contemplate the question, can we build a more beautiful world that centers our interdependence? A big thank you again to the Great Feast of London for having us. I hope that you enjoy this episode. Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. This is the revolution. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. Hi, welcome. It's lovely to be back at the Great Feast of London today. This time we're doing a live podcast for The Future is Beautiful, which is this beautiful show that I've been hosting for about 4 years, where we've been exploring the weave between politics, spirituality, sustainability, and creativity, and what we need in both our inner worlds and in what we create, so that we can create a beautiful future despite the challenges that we meet at this time. And today, our guest is Charles Eisenstein, who has been on the podcast before and also taken part in a live event that we did recently. Yeah, and we're going to be just here having a little exploration of where do we go from here. So welcome, Charles.
Hi, Amisha. Happy to be back with you.
Charles, as we sit here in July 2020, it's been a bit of an initiation year so far for all of us, as we've kind of been navigating a whole different set of rules and challenges. Some people are terrified about what that means for the future, whereas others are hopeful that something new is being birthed at this time. I would love to hear where you are with what you feel is being birthed.
Yeah, well, first I'll say that the terror and the hope and all of the other emotions that people are cycling through, including me, sometimes maybe despair, sometimes relief, then this optimism, maybe even excitement, all of these are part of the process, part of our letting go process from the old normal and our evolving into into a place where we can actually even accept a different kind of future. It's not necessarily my job to be like, okay, here are all the reasons why we should be optimistic and why it's going to be okay. Like even that part of the process where it seems undeniable that it isn't going to be okay and everything is dark, that's important too. So, because one thing that's happening is that we are being shown so much that was beyond the confines of the old normal that kept us focused on a certain future. A lot of people maybe, I mean, not everybody, but the possibilities that our hearts exist for a future so much more authentic and beautiful and intimate and harmonious. Those data points from that future were kind of, in the spiritual realm, or not really part of practical reality. So we're being deconditioned from that old future. And that doesn't mean that we're automatically going to step into a more beautiful world. That's the phrase I like to use, a more beautiful world. We're not like being lifted out of our trajectory toward destruction of the biosphere and the degradation of human beings, et cetera, et cetera. We're not being rescued from that, but we certainly are being gifted this interruption where we can say, okay, do we actually even want to go back to normal? Or what parts of the old world do we actually value now, having been without them for a while? What do we want to go back to? And what maybe are we kind of done with? Yeah, I could go on, but maybe we can just start with that.
Yeah, I'm having some issues with your sound. Like, we talked about the static in our sound check, and it definitely started as soon as we went live again.
Okay.
So let's see.
Let me try a different microphone. Hold on.
So as Charles is sorting that out, I forgot to tell you anything about him. And perhaps you already know, but Charles is the author of some amazing books, including Sacred Economics, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, and Climate, A New Story, and has written some really fascinating essays this year, especially, including The Coronation, which has been about coronavirus, and The Conspiracy Myth, kind of looking at these different narratives that we have for what is going on or what could be going on at this time.
Okay, how are we now?
Ah, that's amazing.
Amazing, okay.
Yes.
I've hooked up my good mic. Great. We could just riff on whatever the next thing is, but I'm happy that we have a good, clear sound now.
Yeah.
I won't repeat it. I'll just say that, Amisha mentioned, people being in terror of the future, uncertainty, despair, despondency, hope, optimism, maybe euphoria. Thank goodness this is happening. And then, but hold on, what about all of the underprivileged of the world? And all of this mess, this chaos, this cycling through different emotions, this is part of a process by which we are divesting ourselves of the assumptions, the habits of thought, and even the identity that was held in the old story and in the old normal. So there's a kind of a liberation going on, even ironically enough, in the midst of our confinement. Many people still being confined in various ways. Yet there is, even in the moments of despair, there is a sense of a possibility, a new possibility that is born of breakdown. I mean, in fact, sometimes it seems like possibility is always born of breakdown. So again, that doesn't mean that we're being rescued from the old normal. We could go back to it. We could pull down on it. And in fact, there are signs that we are doubling down on it. There's also the choice where we don't have to go back to all of the old normal. We can go back to some of it. Maybe some of it we value even more now that we've been without it. Like the dance party. Do we know how precious that was? And as we navigate the future, are we really going to sacrifice that, and for how long, for the purpose of risk minimization? So there are all kinds of not easy to answer questions coming up. It's not a black and white thing of, okay, safety versus freedom. It's like how and when and how much. Anyway, I could speak a lot more, but maybe I'll turn it back over to you now, and now that we have good sound.
Yeah, I find that question to be really interesting around like freedom versus safety, that responsibility to protect each other, knowing that a lot of the measures that we've become kind of accustomed to in these last months are creating other kinds of harm. And so finding that balance in ourselves and in our communities, in our society, of how, of kind of which aspects of the danger we kind of tend to versus like which aspects of like the real human need we tend to.
Right. One of the possibilities that lies before us, or I would say even the key to a more beautiful future, is that we take in information that had been excluded before. And this information includes all of the worst things that are happening in the world that have been walled out by systemic privilege and ideology. And it also includes like the most wonderful, beautiful, miraculous healing data points. We've been in a very narrow worldview. In the response to COVID-19, like as you were saying, okay, in the epidemiological conversation about, lockdown and no lockdown and how many lives does it save and so forth, if you look at it that purely through a disease lens, you're not going to consider things like, well, what happens with domestic abuse when you lock everything down, or depression, suicide, or hunger, when people all over the global south who live hand to mouth, earning that day the food that feeds their children, what happens when they're out of a livelihood? How many of them are facing starvation? And the answer is a lot. And so we need to expand our horizons and take in, and this is one thing that is arising with COVID-19. It's an increase in compassion. More people thinking about, well, how are my actions going to affect somebody else? And so this is an opportunity for us to really exercise that muscle and expand it even further. And I'm well aware in our time of extreme political polarization and the politicization of everything, that some of what you and I are saying, someone might be, you must be Trump supporters. Because if you're questioning lockdown, then you're on Trump's side because he is a less than enthusiastic overseer of lockdown. And I'm like, in fact, that whole worldview, the Make America Great Again worldview, actually suffers from the same flaw of what does it leave out? It leaves out all of the data points that might tell you that maybe America wasn't so great after all. So this is like a really general thing that that connects the COVID-19 dialogue, the race dialogue, and I hope that it extends into the environment as well. Like where our future, our beautiful future, how does it become beautiful? It becomes beautiful through the expansion of our consciousness. And what does that exactly mean? That doesn't mean getting to elevated spiritual states. What the expansion of consciousness means is that we become conscious of things that we were not conscious of before. The things that were left out, marginalized, excluded, they come back into a bigger worldview in which necessarily one self becomes a little smaller and one's own culture becomes a little smaller as we open the gateways to the vastness of this universe. Now I'm sounding less political and more metaphysical, but these are all part of the same movement.
In that moment where we sort of are aware of the bigger expanse, I also feel that our own capacity for presence expands as well.
Our capacity expands, yeah. And paradoxically, the expansion of our capacity sometimes starts with paralysis. And I'm sure many people have gone through this in recent times as we become bewildered by the flood of contradictory information and competing narratives, and by also the dissolving of ways and institutions and systems that had seemed so solid before. It's like, what do I hold on to? What do I do? And one of the reactions to this kind of uncertainty is simply paralysis. And in a way, that's a good thing. It's like, okay, let me think for a minute here. Let me pause. reorganize my mind around all of this new information, and because it takes time to really get that everything is different and that the old normal is not coming back. It's part of a grief process, where for a while it's hard to believe. Many people are facing death in various ways. My dear mother is getting near her time, and there's part of me that doesn't believe it. I mean, I can even picture my dear grandmother, and if I close my eyes, she's still there. So that we know that in the classical grieving process, there's a period of denial, and then other stages, and ultimately with acceptance. So I think that the death of the old world also takes us some time to really embody, to really understand that things have changed. And in a way, we're ready for it. This is not a system, whatever you want to call it, capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I think actually the real name of it is deeper than all of those things. This is not a system that is robust and serving humanity anymore. Like we're kind of ready for it to die. A lot of people have been almost cheering collapse from Y2K to 2012 to now COVID-19, financial collapse, et cetera, et cetera. Like we're ready and still afraid for the shell of the world to crack and dissolve. But also there's part of me anyway that's like, yeah, bring it on. Even though I know that there's no guarantee. I mean, right now, the ones who are really feeling the impact, I'm going to say something and then contradict myself. I was going to say the ones who are really feeling the impact the most are not those who, we have to work at home now, work from home and shelter in place. But it is people in South Asia and Africa and to some extent South America, Central America, who are in desperate straits. I mean, you can see the videos and pictures of children who are like emaciated, even knowing, so that there's no guarantee that kind of circumstance isn't going to visit the currently affluent parts of the world. Things can fall apart very quickly. And it may be that our society goes through that kind of initiation as well. And I know this, this isn't, fun and games, although actually on another level it is. There is a playful element and this readiness to engage. Maybe we'll have a moment of sobriety when we realize exactly what we've set in motion. Hope I'm not getting too spun out here. I just want to say, this is another thing that's happening. One way or another, what happens to the world happens to ourselves. This is the cornerstone of the world that we want to build. It's called interbeing. At least that's what Thich Nhat Hanh has called it. Interbeing, interconnection, that we're not separate from the ecosystem, that we're not separate from other people, that the people that we bomb and kill and destroy, something within us gets killed and destroyed too, that we're all in this together. I mean, you see that slogan even. This is a truth that is arising, surging in our time. In a way, like you could say, well, objectively speaking, the people of Bangladesh or Nigeria are suffering way more than anybody in North America or the UK. But really, subjectively, people are suffering so much that suicide rates are going up. People are suffering so much that they're abusing their children, that they're getting addicted to things. I mean, they're the pit of despair. We are all in this together. And that realization is the foundation of the future that you talk about when you name it as beautiful.
Yeah, and we've been living in a system built off trauma. And in this scenario, a lot of the kind of movement and the escapism has stopped. It just exasperates the trauma that exists. And so many people have had their support taken away, whether that's financial, emotional, just touch, and the little routines that just kind of make life okay for many. It's interesting. I mean, I'm sitting here in like the biggest like inner world transition that I've ever experienced in my life. My father left his body like 5 days ago, and it's very hard for me to think about the future today. You know, it's like I'm not sitting here in a kind of a feeling of grief of like, how can I, you know, like, oh, how can I continue? Actually, I felt this very beautiful transition as my father left his body. I was with him. I don't feel like paralyzed with grief, but I also feel like the entire constructs of both my inner world and the world in which I live has just completely shifted. And I haven't as yet, I mean, it's been a few days. I guess to me, that kind of relates to what the thing that you're used to like ceases to exist in that form. It takes a moment to kind of get with the reconfiguration. We're in that moment collectively as we're kind of like grieving the pre-COVID times where you could dance in a sweaty mosh pit without thinking twice about it, or, you know, you could get on a plane or like travel through multiple countries without thinking about it. All of these things that we could do. As we're in this place where everything is being like redefined, we're planning a cremation, and most people can't come because they're over 70 and they're shielding, because a lot of people, I'm from an Indian family, and the most concentrated Indian area of the UK is Leicester, and that has 3 times more COVID than anywhere else in the UK, and has got a local lockdown. So we're having lots of phone calls from people saying, well, we can't, we're locked in, you know? So you're kind of like in that thing where you're like, wow, well, everything's different. I'm having to just allow that process of that inner shift and that kind of whole like reality shift happen in order to allow me to find my way in the future, in the co-creation of our more beautiful world, but from like a place of where I actually am now, not where I was 6 days ago, because I know that that's changed in a way that it's never going to be the same again.
Yes, it's you know, that resonates a lot with what I'm seeing us collectively go through. You know, it's kind of like, in a way, it is like grieving a loved one. You know, it's not that the loved one was perfect, just like the world that is in the I mean, I think like we've just seen the beginning of it, actually, of breakdown. And I could be wrong. Like maybe things will kind of go back to normal. You know, I can't say for sure, but it sure looks to me that a breakdown, which has been kind of underway for decades, and we've just been kind of holding it together, barely holding it together, but it's getting more and more fragile and harder to hold together, and more vulnerable to any shock. It seems like this breakdown process is accelerating right now. It's entered a new phase. Our grief for it, our shock and our grief, and all these stages and emotions that we go through, like to say, well, you know, that world wasn't worth saving anyway, because look at the ecocide, look at the social injustice, look at the genocide, look at, it wasn't worth it anyway. Like that'd be like saying, oh yeah, you know, grandma, you know, she was, and just naming all the bad things about grandma. I mean, like the old story, I call it, it was a being. There was a lot that was beautiful and good and precious, even in the midst of the racism and the poverty and the ecological destruction and all of the bad things of civilization. There was a lot of beauty too. And I'm not saying that civilization is ending, but maybe a certain kind of civilization is ending. I don't want to bypass the very necessary grief, because a lot of what was part of ourselves, part of our identity, like, you know, going to a concert. And I don't want to say that we have to get used to a world where we never gather for funerals or weddings or concerts or dances or festivals ever again. In fact, I don't think that is the way that we should be going. But nonetheless, some things are passing, like maybe one thing that's passing is gigantic festivals and concerts. the Burning Mans, and the Boom Festivals, where there are tens of thousands of people coming from all over the world, putting huge strain on local resources. Like, yeah, maybe the future is local. There's like a lot of good reasons, even beyond diseases, to live in a more local world. In fact, people have been yearning for that for a long time, to connect to community again, to eat locally, to know the person who grew your food, to be reliant on people rather than distant strangers mediated by markets. Like, this is a return to our interconnections that we've been craving for a long time and compensating for by consumption, with power, with all of the substitutes for the interconnections and the intimacy and the relationships that make somebody fully human. We can use this opportunity to really claim and build those things. That, yes, we have this intervention in an addiction, because like there were so many powerful economic and social and political forces that were seemingly unalterable, like inevitable. Like Margaret Thatcher said, there is no alternative. And now they're not looking so unchangeable anymore. Yeah, so it's not, about, okay, we're never going to have weddings and funerals and dances again, but maybe they become smaller scale, maybe they become more local. Maybe global connectivity does happen electronically. We don't travel so much. We don't go to tourist destinations, but we become more curious about the history of our own places and the unique kind of beauty that each place on earth possesses. And maybe travel becomes a journey again, and not, a simple consumer purchase, but a real journey when we do travel. I'm not saying we should never travel, but it's maybe not so cavalier anymore. Like, this does not sound like a bad future, a more local future, where art and music are much more a function of your relationships and not another thing that we consume. This is a beautiful future, and it is maybe more available to us now than it was.
Yeah, that feels very powerful. And I feel like there's this life skill of this time, which is about being able to be centered in the uncertainty and being able to be open as big changes are happening, and living with a kind of fluidity so that we can keep finding the opportunity and the beauty that's being presented to us. And, as somebody that's been an adult during these years of mass travel and consumption, I found that it has made some of my local relationships very weak, because in my case, most of my relatives live in different countries to the one that I live in. And as well as that, even most of my closer friends are WhatsApp relationships where, we send each other messages and notes. Whereas if it's you are where you are and you go out the door and you hang out with whoever's there and, like you said, you make music together, then it kind of lends to this different way of looking at it. But I guess what I find really interesting is that as some of these lockdown measures have been loosened, I have heard a lot of people really excited about how they got to go and get their latte again. And then I think, we're not getting it.
Yeah. If I'm thinking about a beautiful future, I do think that there is, the corner coffee shop and things like that.
It wasn't the corner coffee shop.
Oh, it wasn't. It was Starbucks. Yeah, I mean, it's part of the grief, I mean, there's a certain familiarity with these things, and people love their Dunkin' Donuts, and their Starbucks, and it's like what people have constructed their lives from, because that's what was available, and then you take away even that, we really have to extend our compassion and not be like, oh, well, that was a corporate chain or something like that. I mean, people are doing their best as living as life. I mean, that's what people are, is life taking the form that life takes when it's in the situation that it's in. So we're all doing our best here in a very impoverished world. In fact, the wealth that Western societies seem to possess is a facade for an acute kind of poverty that is not visible through our metrics. But to source all of your things through impersonal machines and their functionaries, there's something missing there that is fundamental to being human. And I do, it's not like I think that we should not have long distance communication and not do this and not have WhatsApp, and like two of my best friends, one's Nigerian, one's Indian. They're both in different parts of India now. I'm like, wow, am I ever going to see them again? I have friends and relatives. My children all are within driving distance of me right now, which is a real blessing. But it is really this is changing my calculations about my future. It's like, yeah, I am not going to consider moving to Costa Rica or California or Colorado or something like that. I'm going to stay local. And that's a blessing. I'm grateful for it.
I think one of the things that's been interesting about the way that coronavirus has happened is that it kind of took away everything all at once, rather than just like a few bits and left us with less. It was kind of like, okay, wait, actually it's all stopping. And then now we have the computers, right? And so it's kind of interesting because it's not like we were just told, okay, international travel's stopping, but like go and enjoy your local environment. It was like, stay home. I'm curious from here, as you were saying, like, well, what are the other alternatives? Like from here, we're in this place where, of course, like everyone's been missing all kinds of things on all spectrums of like things that exemplify maybe what the soul is really longing for, and things that exemplify kind of what the addictions are longing for. And so we've been kind of experiencing all of that in this like condensed time, whilst adjusting to different ways of doing everything from family to work to friendship to romance. Like the whole thing is just completely all shifted at once. And so we're in this really unique position, which is, what do we choose from here?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, that's a beautiful frame. I love it, what you said, like what our souls are missing and what our addictions are missing. If we could use that distinction and as we move forward and see what we want to reclaim and what we want to let go of, that would really help us navigate. Just applying it myself. I'm just applying it myself. I don't know if you've ever had a serious addiction. I can't say I've had a serious addiction, but there comes a point where you're like, you feel so done with it, but you can't stop doing it. In a certain way, it was like international travel or, airplane travel. It's not like I was doing it for my jollies, but it was my work. I was a speaker. I would speak at conferences and festivals and stuff. And I'd be invited. And in the early days, I'd be like, yeah, this is great. Finally, people want to hear me. And because, for years, I had been totally obscure and starving. Well, not actually starving, but in a fair amount of poverty. And then finally, I start to gain audiences and I'm getting invited, and it was good for a while. And then at some point, it became a bit tedious. And I'd be like, well, boy, those are such lovely people. I really should say yes to that one. And this one, this is the only way I'm going to see certain friends. And I go to this one every year. And so I should go to this one. And this is such a good cause. I'll go to that one. This one's offering me a generous honorarium. I'll go to that one. And I couldn't say no. And I was kind of wanting it to be stopped by a power beyond myself. And so that's something that I'm like, thank you, I can let go of that. Whereas local gatherings and civic life and the corner coffee shop kind of thing, and the bookstore and the library and that kind of thing, it meets a deeper longing than just something expedient or addictive. Human beings need relationship. for our health, for our full existence. We cannot do it with the limited senses available via electronic media. We need to be in physical presence with each other. We need touch. We need to experience together an environment with all of its subtle vibrations. We need to have common experiences, a multitude of common experiences, shared experiences. These are, to use your distinction, like these are soul level needs. And they will not be handed back to us, I don't think, by authorities that are themselves addicted to control. They have to be reclaimed. We have to actually exert our will, our individual and collective will to say, yes, I do value that, maybe even more than risk minimization. And we have to enter into that conversation because the tilt of authority is toward control and keeping everybody safe. I'm not saying safety is not important or that we should never sacrifice togetherness for safety. I wouldn't be that extreme. But I do think that it is a conversation we really need to enter into instead of safety being the trump card for everything. So, let's make all the children wear masks. The development of empathy through seeing facial expressions. Is that important? Is that part of our conversation? I just want that to be part of the conversation.
Well, I feel like the issue for many people around like what's safe and what's not is that I know being here in the UK that the government guidelines don't make sense. So for a couple of weeks, you've been allowed to go shopping to like a kind of a clothing store where clothes have been made in sweatshops, but you're still not allowed to go to your relative's house. And then you're like, well, how come it's less dangerous for me to be shopping with a whole load of strangers than it is for me to go to like one relative's house? And so a lot of the rules, you're allowed to go and get your hair cut, but you're not allowed to go and see your doctor face to face. So we're kind of experiencing this view of safety that we know is driven by a market idea of safety rather than a human idea of safety. And so that can be very confusing because then you kind of get that thing. It's a little bit like being a teenager where you're like, that rule doesn't make sense,
Yeah. It reminds me of school.
Yeah.
With these arbitrary rules and where obedience itself is a virtue. So when you ask, well, why? The answer is because it's the rules. And the assumption is that the rules keep you safe or keep you moral, or keep others safe.
Because I mean, personally, I've had very little exposure to people during the last few months, in part because I was writing a book and in part because I knew that I was going to be spending some of it alone and some of it with my parents and that they weren't well. I didn't know that my father was going to die like during this time, not of COVID, but I knew that I might need to come here and I wanted to make sure that I didn't bring any risks. And I actually only went to the supermarket like 5 times during this whole time as well. And for me, that's been fine because I am somebody that can be in a festival, but I can also be in an ashram. So I can just kind of like tune into like that different kind of level. So I haven't really had that choice of like, do I feel safe to go here or not? I guess I have had the question quite a few times of like, if I do this, could I potentially put my parents in more danger? And is it worth it? I've had that question come up quite a lot. But I guess if I'd been in a position where I was, not in that direct situation and just thinking, oh, like, is it all right to go to this park even if it's really crowded? Or like, do I go and get my hair cut like right now? I could feel that there would be this kind of wanting to rebel against things that don't make sense. And then part of that is just that craving for a society that really centers human well-being. And then knowing that that's not what we have, kind of navigating inside of that. And yet there is also an invitation for us to create a society that centers human well-being, at least if not in the big rules, in like our own rules that we adhere to collectively?
Yeah, I would say that a society that centers human well-being is one facet of a bigger jewel. Partly what you're describing is this dilemma which I face as well. It's like, okay, given the way that everything is, like I can't myself right now change the big picture. So I have to accept the facts on the ground. And given this situation, then yeah, like I had the same thing, am I going to visit my parents? Are they going to get to see their grandchildren ever again? Like, is that more important than like, should they sacrifice that? And do I let them make that decision? What if mom says, "Oh, I want to see the grandkids," and I have reason to like. Actually, I think I had COVID. I never got tested, but in March I was on airplanes and in enclosed spaces with people who were sick and stuff, and like, and then after that I had a bit of shortness of breath, but it was barely noticeable. And I didn't visit my parents at that time, even though my mother has been ill. On a bigger level, so like if I could wave my magic wand and totally change the system, then the CDC and the WHO and the NHS, they would be vigorously promoting all kinds of wellness practices. They would be promoting Stephen Buhner's herbal protocol for preventing and treating COVID. They would be spending hundreds of millions of dollars, or the equivalent of what they're spending now on pharmaceutical research. They would be spending that to research Artemisia annua, which is being used in Africa, or the Chinese medicines that were so effective in Wuhan. Our priorities and our operating paradigms of medicine and healthcare would be so completely different. And so there's part of me, it's like, but it should be that way. So I'm not going to go along with these masks, because if we were only doing that, this would all be completely pointless. Mm-hmm. But we're not doing all that. And I can't make that happen. And so I have this feeling of being marooned in an alien universe that oozes wrongness from every crevice. And where I just don't feel at home, because I can look at, not just healthcare, but pretty much every institution of our world and think, well, that's not how it's supposed to be. We're not supposed to be locking people up in prisons.
When they come from traumatic backgrounds.
Right. And the whole idea of police and deterrence and threat, and that we need violence to keep ourselves safe. Like all of these implicit assumptions of our culture need to be examined. And so for me, it's a matter of channeling my indignation and alienation into something that's actually useful, given the circumstances that are actually in front of us.
Yeah, and I want to clarify. I want to ask you about that, but I want to clarify as well for those that are like less familiar with our work, that when I talk about like human well-being, I don't mean human progress. I mean humans, and what our souls need, and in relationship to each other and to the earth as well. Like that is all part of that sense of well-being. It's not like human survival, human winning. It's human interconnectedness. So as you kind of contemplate that for yourself, I mean, where do you go from here? What is coming for you?
What's really coming for me is, I was actually referring to it a bit before when I was talking about relocalization and not traveling as much. What's coming for me is to seriously put a lot of my energy into building community, or to finding community. We're looking to relocate to somewhere where we're not so dependent on the food in the supermarket. I mean, I have a garden, but it's not like a homestead. You know what I mean? It's not like a community of people who all have gardens and grow and produce their own food and produce their own medicine and have carpentry skills and produce their own music, and produce everything that makes life possible and everything that makes life good. That's hard to find. I mean, most people in developed, and the word developed is actually part of the problem here. Most people in developed countries do not have that. And this crisis has been showing me that it's really time. Can't really keep one foot in both worlds so much anymore. And it's stirred up my decades-long desire to live in that way. And, like when I'm traveling a lot, like I can't really live in that way. I mean, so it's the end of an era for me. But for many people, it is now about community, relocalizing that which can and should be local. And there's also a place for extended community, global community. What we're doing right now is, it has its beauty and necessity to it. Also looking to transition a bit from like this broadcast model, where I'm just putting stuff out, essays and recordings and stuff, to gathering more of a online community, for lack of a better word. I'm not sure if community is quite the right word for that, but anyway, that's what it is for me right now. Is that what you were asking, or did you want me to make it more global?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be more global. If there's something that you want to add in that respect.
I would just name the yearning, which I'm sure is not just in myself, to come into more multidimensional relationships with the people around me. It's not just about say hi to your neighbors. It's about how do we actually take care of each other in meaningful ways? How do we repair the loss of our beingness that comes through these attenuated relationships, mediated relationships through markets and through technology? How do we come back into community? Even before the crisis, that was the most common thing that I would hear when I would ask, what's missing from your life? In developed parts of the world. In less developed parts of the world, what is missing from your life might have a very different answer, because people have community there. And in fact, what development is the replacement of community with distant relationships and technological and market dependence. So on a global scale, we're really looking at rethinking development entirely. And on a local scale, we're looking at how do we reverse some of development? How do we reclaim some of our relationships to the people and the places that are around us? So I would just name that yearning, and see if it speaks to you. Like the world could be so beautiful built on that. We're visiting friends right here. They have an amazing community here. Her daughter makes leather quivers for arrows that she then uses to hunt deer herself. And then, maybe she'll give one to somebody who hunts deer, and these are gorgeous. Another one makes baskets from like the raw fibers of plants, and gathers those. And we could be surrounded by beautiful, lovingly made objects without sacrificing anybody or anything. I mean, this world is fundamentally abundant. If you're not devoting 80 or 90% of human effort, human labor, human creativity toward mounds of plastic junk and the armaments industry and global tourism, and the aviation industry, and like all of these unnecessary things that are actually just compensations for the loss of relationship. If we're not doing that, we have so much surplus. Nobody on earth has to go hungry, for God's sake. I mean, even now, like more than enough food is wasted to feed every hungry person on earth. I've been in some conversations recently about how organic and regenerative agriculture can outproduce conventional agriculture when it's done right. Like all of these, well, we have to sacrifice, the local and the organic and the artisanal for the sake of saving the world. I mean, this is all a false narrative. So anyway, it got me on my soapbox a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me of how excited I was about like 10 years ago of like kind of the sharing economy and libraries of things. And actually, why does every single apartment in London need to have their own drill that they use once every 5 years to put pictures up? And what could happen if we could let go of this false idea that we need to have everything we need ourselves and actually move back into the way that things have been in communities and societies for many years, where some people are better at certain things, or some people can grow one thing whilst another person grows something else, and that we can come together and share. And this feels like, there could be an invitation into really living that. And then at the same time, it feels like we have like a long way to go in a kind of bigger general kind of outside of the niche bubbles of people that have been already longing for these kinds of ways of living, because we all saw what happened with toilet paper, like in every country. And so we have to also recognize that that's where we are. Not everyone is in that place, but what can we do on a more collective level to heal that trust again, where there isn't the fear of not having the thing, or the fear of like not having your own of that thing, feeling open to really sharing again. And it's happening a lot in pockets, but you know, I wonder if it's happening way more, and then we just get shown like the big examples on TV of like where it's really not happening. But it's an interesting moment of that kind of surrender, because I know for myself that, you know, as somebody that's traveled a lot, like you just feel a bit better if you've got everything you need in your own backpack, like
right.
And when I first went trekking at the age of 19, like I learned like how do you cleverly pack everything you might need for whatever might happen, so that you're not caught short. And it's like that's quite an unlearning process to not feel that you have to have everything for every potential outcome, but actually that you can be in trust of the uncertainty and of the ways in which we might be able to show up for each other.
Yeah, I think that last point is the key, because when you like just take the trekker, you know, the backpacker who has everything that she needs, what that means is that she never needs to come into a relationship with anybody. But if you go without something, then you're going to have to maybe ask somebody to borrow theirs. That is the beginning of a relationship. Relationships are built from gifts. My friend Manish Jain leads these. Our friend Manish Jain. You know about his what does he call them? Like he does these journeys where it gets everybody on a bike, and you just bike off into the countryside, and you cannot take any food, water, money, or cell phone with you. You just go just on your bike, and you have to rely on the generosity of the people that you meet. And so you build relationships that way. You know, just translate that the backpacker who doesn't have everything that she needs into our lives here in this society, where, you know, you have everything you need in your house. You never need to borrow anything from your neighbor. You never need help with anything. You pay somebody to come in and fix your toilet, or pay somebody to come in and do whatever needs to be done that you can't do yourself. So you no longer need anybody who you meet on the street, or whose home you visit for dinner. And how deep can the relationship go? In the background, you both know that you don't need each other. And so now, as these systems for meeting all of our needs with money break down, some people are being propelled into needing each other again. But it's hard when we're all locked down, you know, to actually do anything for each other. And we could see a continued economic collapse actually in coming months. So that push might be there. But then I really want to focus more on the pull. Like, this is not decline in your quality of life if you no longer source everything from within your own house, as you were saying. Like, how often do you use your electric drill? Or like, does every house need all of these appliances, you know, and all of these things that stack up in your garage? In this community here where I am, like, people build a lot of their own little chicken coops, you know, and composting toilets and drying shacks to dry herbs. I don't think every single one of these people has their own table saw. But how often do you need a table saw? When you have a building project, you need it. Like, not every house needs their own table saw. And when you have to borrow it, or when you have to go to like a collective, like a common workshop that everybody contributes to, then you have relationships and you have people you can rely on, because after all, he borrowed my table saw. Now I feel totally fine to ask him to help me out with this project, and we have that's what I meant by multidimensional relationships. We take care of each other in more ways than one, and we learn each other's stories, we care about each other. We need each other. This is maybe the biggest letting go that is facing us today. It's to let go of our independence and to embrace, which was, by the way, an illusion the whole time, and to embrace our interdependence. Yesterday was Interdependence Day, so this is a good time to speak of this. We embrace our interdependence, and even I want to even use the word dependence. It is okay to be dependent on other people, on life. In fact, by saying that, we're just admitting the truth that we are, in fact, hopelessly dependent on other beings. We will never achieve the paradise of independence that technology and money have promised us. You won't need anybody if only you have the right machines and enough money. Do we actually even want that paradise? It's not a paradise. It is isolation. It is actually a hell, because we are not separate beings. And now we have a push and a pull to really step into that.
Hello. We're taking a short pause from the conversation. On behalf of our team and our community, thank you for being here and co-creating The Future is Beautiful. Much dedication, love, and time goes into the production of this show. We believe in being advertising free in a world that's always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. And so we make this show with you and for you, thanks to your support. There are 3 ways you can be more involved, so we can share the vision, wisdom, and creativity here as we explore what it means to be a human in this time. You can support the podcast by sharing it with your friends, posting episodes on social media, and doing iTunes reviews. You can support as a patron by making a monthly or one-off donation of your choice. And with this, you join the Global Patrons group and monthly video calls where we share connection and insight. You get to know the other amazing patrons from around the world, their stories and their work, and you offer direct support to me and the team, as well as being brought into the behind the scenes of creating something like this. It sounds like a lot, but it's as much or as little as you want to get involved in. You can become a member of Presence, our membership collective of care and practice, where we explore how to embody the themes of the podcast with workshops, calls, special events, tree whispers, and powerful tools, practices, and rituals that you can bring into your life. This is open to absolutely everybody as we create an inclusive and diverse space that celebrates well-being as a human right, where we explore together what it means to be creative, courageous, and connected to ourselves, each other, and the earth. This is about embodying sacred activism. We love meeting patrons and Presence members, and how being part in this way weaves our lives together, as well as making this show possible. If anything from this conversation has moved or inspired you, please get more involved. All information can be found at www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community. This show really can't go on without your patronage and Presence membership, so please do make it happen. And now, back to the conversation. How much can happen when you just take off that whole kind of veil of I've got it all figured out, and then we kind of step together in that place of vulnerability? I've experienced it so much here in the last weeks, as coming into that space where all of the normal dynamics fall away, and then everyone discovers so much more about each other in ways that open up to so much possibility that you wouldn't even know was there before.
And sometimes you need, that's the intervention of the addiction, sometimes you need an outside power just to make it stop, and so that the old habits are interrupted and new ones can take hold. Yeah, overall, I'm grateful for COVID-19. and for all of the disruption that it's causing. And I say that even with the knowledge of how deep the suffering is that it has engendered on this earth. Nonetheless, I think it's a good thing, not just for me, but I think it's a good thing for humanity. And not because it will automatically, again, it's not because it'll automatically deliver us into a better future, but at least, just like you can intervene in an addiction, but the addict can still relapse, can still continue to use. But at least there's this moment now where hope is born, the hope that something is possible that wasn't possible before. That maybe is a better definition of hope than fantasy or ignorance of reality. It is the recognition of a possibility, the premonition even of a future that we can build. But it's not guaranteed. It requires us to step into the service of that future and to align with that possibility in our choices. But at least there is that possibility now, and it's real. And we can co-create that future. Like those moments, in the cycle of despair and terror and optimism, like those moments are just as true as the moments where everything feels all wrong. They are absolutely true. Like we can build a more beautiful world. It is available to us. It's begging us to step into its service. And when we do, when we bow into the service of this future, all kinds of synchronicities and miracles can happen. And we realize it's not quite just how powerful we are, because it's not the kind of power that you project onto the world, the dominating power. But we realize how much power is available to us when we are in service to these magnificent beings of a more beautiful future.
It's so beautiful. Yeah, I feel like this is a time where COVID has just brought to the surface that which was already unwell in our societies and in our system. And if we are able to, be brave enough to allow like rapid transformation to happen in ourselves as we navigate through this, and allow that expanse of compassion and embody that willingness to keep seeing things differently and keep seeing where the possibility is, and like allowing ourselves to kind of to move like out of a position that we were once in, as often as we can. If we're able not to hold on too tightly to anything that was our identity, then I feel like we can really co-create with the beauty of what is now.
Yeah, it's beautifully said, Amisha. Thank you.
We have just a few moments left of our time together. Normally, I can talk for hours, but I'm in such a place of stillness today. I don't have that many words or questions, which is actually what I'm talking about, like being prepared to just be a different person today than I was yesterday and tomorrow again. I feel like, do you have any closing words that you wish to share?
Well, I'd like to honor the sacredness of the time that you're in, when death clears away the things that are not actually very important and reveals what's precious. In a way, it's like a homecoming. Eventually life resumes, and then maybe there's another death and you're like, oh yeah, I remember now. It's other people that are precious, and these moments that I took for granted that are precious. And I'm really grateful anytime I get a reminder of that or an invocation of that, something that brings me into contact with that truth of the preciousness of each other and the preciousness of every moment. That doesn't involve somebody I love dying, but that it is brought to me through somebody who's in that state like you are right now. Because even through this device, I can sense that that quietness, the stillness that comes when the unimportant stuff gets cleared away and reveals the truth beneath it. And so maybe we shouldn't fill up this space too much with words.
But there is one thing, which is that I'm always open for an experience to be what it is, not what other people would project it to be or what it has been before. And I know I'm going to miss my father at so many moments for the rest of my life. And yet I energetically experienced his liberation so fully in the presence that we spent together in those days and in that moment, that I feel that liberation from that experience. And so it would be disrespectful to not fully honor that as well. And that we can hold the complexities of what will never be the same again, but what has shifted and the different reality that we're continually finding ourselves in. That's where I'm like re-emerging into this world from, in this openness of being able to deeply listen in each moment to what it actually is.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up too, the liberation that comes with death. Death is an ending, but it's a beginning too. This is something that has been missing from my cultural upbringing, which was very scientific. I was not brought up by religious people. So in the religion of science, death is the final annihilation of the self. And it's not a liberation, it's just, it's the final failure. And it does me good to be reminded, even though intellectually I no longer believe that, there's part of me that was deeply conditioned by that belief system of separation. And I think also, given our social circumstances right now, we can feel the liberation that is possible with the dying of the old world. Should we choose to go that way? The old world is holding on pretty tight, and it brings up, how do we ease this death process? Or do we stay on a ventilator for more decades?
It's really hard for me to say anything about that isn't so personal,
Mm-hmm.
But I have been very conditioned to be English through my lifetime. And when I was really young, I went to those big English schools, like the boarding schools. And I'm grateful to feel more Indian this week than I've ever felt in my entire life, because to really be in that space of where death and rebirth are the same, and where an ending's always a beginning and they overlap, and to fully recognize that we're always in that space. It is about knowing ourselves so that we can discern between the soul and the addiction, and then from there we can gracefully let what wants to go and give space to what wants to grow. And the kids agree. So
yes, they do. Yeah, I love that sound of kids squealing with laughter.
That always happens when you and I do podcasts, Charles.
Mm-hmm. It's my favorite sound.
Charles, it's always a pleasure. How would you like people to connect with you if they want to?
I mean, if they want to go to my website, they can do that, charleseisenstein.org.
Brilliant. Thank you for spending this time with us. And we are still in this energy of this full moon lunar eclipse. As I was sharing last night, it's Guru Purnima. It's our time of of really honoring our teachers, the inner teacher and the teacher in all things. And, you know, when we're paying attention, they're everywhere. and kind of honoring that we're always in this process of learning and unlearning and transformation on our individual and our collective being. Thank you.
Well, thank you for this time. Yes, thank you, Amisha. I hope we speak again.
I'm sure we will. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you, Lauren, and the whole team at the Great Feast of London. Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mentioned in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe, and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us, so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listener support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question. How will you create beauty in the world?